The lake house was supposed to feel like an apology. That's what my fiancé kept calling the weekend, a chance for everyone to start fresh. 3 days at his grandmother's place on Lake Geneva, just the family, before the wedding in October. I remember standing on the dock the first evening, watching the sun melt into the water, thinking maybe I'd been too sensitive about his mother all along. Maybe the cold comments and the corrected pronunciations and the way she always seemed to be measuring me had been nothing but nerves on my part. I held that hope for almost 18 hours. My name doesn't matter much to this story, but the people in it do, so I'll tell you who they were. My fiancé, I'll call him by what he was to me then. The man I loved. The man I'd said yes to in a parking garage of all places because we couldn't wait to get inside. His mother, who insisted everyone call her by her first name until the second she wanted to pull rank, at which point she became his mother in the most weaponized sense of the word. His younger sister, sweet on the surface, sharp underneath. And his grandmother, who turned out to be the only honest person in the entire family, though I didn't learn that until the very end. I was 31. I ran a small physical therapy clinic I'd built from nothing. 2 treatment rooms and a reception desk I'd assembled myself with an Allen wrench and a lot of cursing. By the time I met him, the clinic had grown to 6 therapists and a waiting list. I tell you this not to brag, but because it matters later, when his family started talking about my work like it was a hobby I'd eventually outgrow. The first morning at the lake, his mother made breakfast for everyone but me. I want to be precise about this because when I described it to my best friend later, she thought I was exaggerating. There were 6 of us at the table. She plated 5 servings of eggs and toast and set them down one by one. And when she got to my seat, she said, "Oh, I assumed you'd want to watch your figure before the dress fittings." Then she smiled like she'd done me a favor. I laughed it off. God, I laughed at so many things that weekend that should have made me stand up and walk into the lake fully clothed. The real beginning, the moment everything turned, came on the second night. His grandmother had gone to bed early. The rest of us were on the screened porch with a bottle of wine, and his mother was holding court the way she always did, telling stories where she was the hero and someone else was the cautionary tale. The lake was black glass beyond the screen. Crickets. The smell of citronella and someone's overpriced perfume. She set down her glass and folded her hands like she was about to give a presentation. "You know," she said, looking at me, "now that you're going to be part of this family, there are some things we should talk through. Practical things." I said sure. I genuinely thought she meant the seating chart. "Our family has a way of doing things," she went on. "It's worked for 3 generations, and it'll work for you too if you let it. The women in this family take care of the home. We always have. My mother-in-law taught me. I'll teach you. You'll teach your daughters." She smiled at her own daughter, who nodded along like a bobblehead. "When you marry my son, you'll be taking over the household, the cooking, the holidays, the calendar. I've been doing the family books for 22 years, and frankly, I'm exhausted. You'll learn those next." I waited for the laugh, the wink, the "this is a joke." It didn't come. And of course, she continued, "the clinic, that little business of yours. It's adorable that you've kept yourself busy, but a marriage in this family is a full-time commitment. My son works very hard. He shouldn't come home to a wife who's checked out because she's been stretching strangers' hamstrings all day." The porch went quiet. I looked at my fiancé. He was studying the label on the wine bottle like it contained the secret to a long life. Here's the thing, I've never been able to fully explain to people. I wasn't even angry in that first moment. I was curious. It was the same feeling I get when a patient describes pain that doesn't match the injury, a sense that something underneath wasn't lining up. So I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I asked questions, the way I do at intake, when I'm trying to find the real source of the problem. Can I ask you something? I said. When you say I'll take over the family books, do you mean I'll have access to the family's finances? See the accounts, the investments, all of it? She blinked. That was the first crack. Well, you'll handle the day to day, the bills, the budgeting, but not access to the actual accounts. Those are managed. By whom? A pause. By me. And by his uncle. I nodded slowly. Okay, second question, and this one's for him. I turned to my fiancé. He looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen on him before. Something hunted. When your mother says I'll be giving up the clinic and taking over the home and learning the books, what are you giving up? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I just want to understand, I said gently. She's laid out a very detailed job for me. Cooking, holidays, calendar, finances, no clinic. What's the corresponding role for you? What are you taking on so that we're, building this thing together? I'll provide, he said finally. His voice came out small. I work. I bring in the income. You bring in the income, I repeated. And then, because I couldn't help myself, how much of the down payment on our house did you bring in? The board got very, very still. We'd bought a house 4 months earlier. A craftsman bungalow with good bones and terrible plumbing, in a neighborhood we both loved. The down payment had been $110,000. Of that, I had put in 95,000. He had put in 15, and even that had come, I would later learn, from a loan his mother gave him, so the split would look less lopsided on paper. He didn't answer me. He didn't have to. His mother answered for him. That's exactly the kind of accounting that destroys marriages, she snapped. Once your family, there's no your money and his money, there's just the family, and the family decides together. The family decides, I said, or you decide. I decide what's best for my son. There it was, out loud on a screened porch over a $40 bottle of wine. I looked at the man I was going to marry and I waited. One last time, I told myself, one real chance for him to say something, anything, to put his hand on my arm and say, Mom, that's enough. To say, we're a team. To say, she's not giving up her clinic. Are you out of your mind? She built that. He said, Babe, can we not do this here? You're making it weird. I'm making it weird. I want to tell you that the heartbreak came roaring up in that moment, but it didn't. What came up was something cooler and clearer. It was the feeling of finally seeing the whole X-ray instead of just the spot that hurt. The damage wasn't new. It had been there the whole time, hairline fractures running through everything, and I'd been treating the symptoms, the rude comments, the dismissals, without ever looking at the underlying break. I stood up. I think I'm going to head to bed, I said. My voice was steady, which surprised me. Thank you for dinner. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the guest's bed in the dark, and I did what I always tell my patients to do when they're overwhelmed. I broke the big impossible thing into small, manageable pieces. What did I actually know? What did I actually own? What could actually be taken from me? And the more I broke it down, the more one fact kept rising to the surface, cold and solid as a stone. The house was in my name, not both names, mine. There was a reason for that, and it wasn't suspicion. It was boring practicality. When we applied for the mortgage, his credit had been wrecked by some old situation he was vague about. Vague in the way I now understood, meant his mother had been involved. The lender had told us flat out, put it in her name or you don't get the rate. So we did. The deed, the mortgage, all of it. Me. He'd been planning to be added later, after we married, once his credit recovered. After we married, I picked up my phone and texted my best friend, who happens to be the smartest person I know and also, conveniently, a family law attorney in Madison. It was past midnight. She answered in 90 seconds because that's who she is. I told her everything. the breakfast, the porch, the books, the down payment, the loan from his mother that I'd just connected the dots on. She was quiet for a long time. Then she sent me a single message that I have screenshotted and saved to this day. Do not sign anything. Do not agree to anything verbally. Get up early. Take photos of every financial document you can find in that house and call me from the car. You're not crazy. You're being managed. You're being managed. The exact phrase that had been circling my head all night, said back to me by someone I trusted with my life. I barely slept the 2 hours that were left of the night. At 5:15, before anyone was up, I went downstairs. The house was silent except for the lake slapping against the dock. And here is where it gets strange, because what I found wasn't something I'd gone looking for. His grandmother was in the kitchen. She was sitting at the table in a robe with a cup of tea, and she looked at me like she'd been expecting me. Couldn't sleep either, she said. It wasn't a question. Sit down, I'll make you a cup. I sat. She made the tea. And then this woman, 84 years old, who had said maybe 9 words to me all weekend, looked at me over her glasses and said, "You're thinking about leaving." I didn't deny it. "Good," she said. I will never forget the way she said it. Flat. Final. Like a doctor delivering a diagnosis she'd seen 100 times. "I watched my daughter-in-law do to you last night exactly what was done to me 60 years ago," she said. "And I watched my grandson do exactly what his grandfather did. Nothing, worse than nothing." He laughed. She wrapped both hands around her mug. "I gave my whole life to this family because I was told that was love. I cooked 40 Thanksgivings. I kept books for a man who never once let me see the savings account. When my husband died, I found out he'd put everything in a trust controlled by his brother. Because God forbid the woman who ran the household for half a century be trusted with a checkbook." She looked at me. "Do you have your own money?" "Some," I said. "The clinic, the house is in my name." Something moved across her face. Something I can only call satisfaction. "Then you listen to me," she said. "You take what is yours and you go. Don't explain, don't argue. Don't give my daughter-in-law the fight she's looking for, because she will win a fight. She's been training for it her whole life. You don't fight her. You just leave. And you leave with everything that's yours, and you never look back." She reached across the table and put her papery hand over mine. "I'm too old to get my life back. You're not. Don't you dare waste the next 50 years finding out the hard way." I started to cry then, quietly. Not for him, for her, and a little for the version of me that would have existed if I'd stayed. She told me one more thing before the house woke up, and it was the thing that changed everything. She told me that the loan his mother had given him for the down payment, the 15,000, had paperwork. Real paperwork. A promissory note his mother had drawn up and made him sign because she didn't trust her own son to pay her back. And that note was in the desk in the den, in a folder marked with his initials, because his mother kept copies of everything she ever held over anyone's head. "She's a careful woman," his grandmother said. "Careful people leave evidence." I photographed that note. I photographed the household ledgers his mother kept in a binder by the phone. The ones that showed 22 years of a family treating one woman's labor as free and infinite. I photographed the deed to our house, which I'd brought in my own folder, just to have the names side by side in the same frame, the mortgage in mine, his name nowhere on it. Then I made coffee, because I wasn't going to let anyone say I'd snuck out like a thief. They came down one by one. His sister first, then his mother, then him, rumpled and uneasy. I poured them all coffee. I sat at the table where I hadn't been given eggs the morning before, and I waited until everyone was settled. And then I said, "I've thought about everything you said last night, and I want to be really clear about where I stand." His mother smiled, victorious already. She thought I was about to surrender. I'm not taking over the household, I said. I'm not giving up my clinic. I'm not learning the family books. And after what I heard last night, I wouldn't touch them with gloves on. And I'm not going to marry into a family that sees a partnership as a staffing problem. The smile fell off her face like a picture off a wall. The wedding's off, I said. I turned to him. I'll have your things from the house boxed up and sent to your mother's, since that's clearly where the decisions get made anyway. The house is mine. It's been mine the whole time. You can keep arguing that family money is family money, but the deed disagrees, and so does the promissory note your mother had you sign, which I'd be very interested to hear her explain in front of everyone. His mother went white. Where did you? You kept copies, I said. Careful people do. He finally found his voice, and of course it was the worst possible voice. You're overreacting. You're throwing away our whole life because of one conversation. It wasn't one conversation, I said. It was a job offer with no salary, no equity, and no exit. I've built a business. I know a bad deal when I see one. I stood up. His grandmother was watching from the doorway, and she gave me the smallest nod, and I have never in my life been so glad to have a witness. I drove to a coffee shop in Lake Geneva and called my friend from the parking lot, and we got to work. The legal part was almost boring in the end, which is its own kind of justice. The house was unambiguously mine. There was no marriage, so there were no marital assets to argue over. His $15,000 contribution to the down payment I returned to him by check within the week. Not because I had to, but because I wanted nothing of his, and I wanted to owe him nothing. The promissory note I never had to use as a weapon. I only ever had to know it existed. Just knowing it was there changed the temperature of every conversation that followed. His mother called 11 times the first day. Then his sister. Then numbers I didn't recognize, aunts, uncles, the whole apparatus mobilized. The voicemail started as outrage and curdled into something closer to fear once they understood I wasn't going to fight in the open where they were strong. I was going to do the boring, devastating thing instead. I was simply going to leave intact with everything that was mine and let the absence of a fight be the loudest thing in the room. He showed up at the clinic 8 days later. I let him in after hours, partly out of old habit, partly because I wanted to see who he was without his mother whispering in his ear. He sat in the chair where my patients sit, and he told me he'd left home, that he saw it now, that his mother had her hooks in everything, and he wanted to be different. He cried. I believed that he believed it. I'm proud of you for leaving, I told him, and I meant it. But you didn't leave for me. You left because the thing she built finally cost you something, and I hope you keep walking. I really do. I just won't be walking with you. He asked if there was any chance. I told him the truth, which I'd learned from an 84-year-old woman over a cup of tea at 5 in the morning. I was too young to spend 50 years finding out the hard way. He left. I locked up. I drove home to the craftsman bungalow with the terrible plumbing, the house with my name on it and no one else's, and I sat on the front step in the dark and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not triumph, exactly, just quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't have anyone else's expectations humming underneath it. His grandmother sent me a letter, a real one, in handwriting that shook a little. She'd gotten my clinic's address off the website. She wrote that she'd told her granddaughter, the bobblehead sister, the same things she'd told me, and that the girl had listened with her whole face for the first time in years. She wrote that it was too late for some things and not too late for others, and that she'd spent her whole life believing those were the same fact when they never were. She signed it with her first name, just her first name, like she was finally a person and not a role. I framed that letter. It hangs in the clinic now, in the little office I built with an Allen wrench, where every woman who comes through my door with a body that's been carrying too much for too long can see it, if she happens to look up. Most don't, but some do. And when they ask about it, I tell them it was written by the bravest person I ever met, who waited 60 years to say one true thing out loud and made sure I didn't have to wait that long. I never married him. I never regretted it for a single day. The plumbing's fixed now. The clinic has 8 therapists and a longer waiting list than ever. And every so often, when the light comes through the front windows just right, I think about that black glass lake and the breakfast I wasn't served, and I am so unbelievably grateful that someone tried to hand me a smaller life, because it turned out I could see exactly how small it was, and I had somewhere bigger to go. I think about that black glass lake more than I expected to. Not the breakfast I wasn't served, not the porch, not the 11 missed calls the next morning, but the 5:15 kitchen and an 84-year-old woman pouring tea for a stranger because she'd decided in the space of one ruined evening that she would not let it happen to one more person. Everything that came after, the deed staying mine, the wedding called off, the quiet on my front step, traces straight back to a chain of small honest choices, hers and mine, set against a chain of small dishonest ones that had been running in that family for 3 generations. Here is what I've come to believe. The grandmother's daughter-in-law built a whole life out of being clever without ever once being kind, and cleverness without kindness curdles into control. It runs the books, it draws up promissory notes against its own son, it serves 5 plates of eggs and skips the sixth. It always loses in the end because people eventually see it, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. So, the first thing I want anyone listening to carry out of this is that being decent isn't softness. Refusing to treat another person as free labor, refusing to lie to get your way, that's the foundation everything stable gets built on. The fiancé wasn't cruel. He was just weak in a place where decency was needed, and weakness in that exact spot cost him a marriage. The second thing is that I didn't escape because I got lucky. I escaped because I asked questions instead of swallowing my discomfort. When the mother laid out my future, the smart move wasn't to argue, it was to get curious, to pull the thread, to ask who really controlled the accounts and what he was giving up in return. The answers were the whole story. Pay attention to the gap between what people say and what the paperwork shows. Read the deed. Know what's in your name. Knowing the house was mine wasn't suspicion, it was just refusing to be confused on purpose. And the last thing, the hardest one. Knowing the truth at 5 in the morning means nothing if you can't make yourself act on it by 9. The grandmother knew the truth for 60 years and couldn't move. That was the real tragedy, not the marriage. What she gave me wasn't information, it was the push to use mine while it still mattered. It took everything I had to pour that coffee, sit at that table, and say the wedding was off to people who'd spent a weekend telling me I didn't count. So if you take anything from me, take this. Be the kind of person who won't manage other people. Stay clear-eyed enough to see when you're being managed, and when you finally see it, be brave enough to stand up before you've given away 50 years. I was 31. The grandmother was 84. The difference between us was never luck. It was timing, and timing is a thing you can choose.